Welcome back, everybody. We're going to begin with week 8, chapter 9 from your textbook, moving into the adult social world. So we're going to talk about socio-emotional development in adolescence and how they make that transition into the young adulthood. So let's begin. So through this chapter, we're going to be asking these questions. And again, whenever you're doing these chapters, make sure you have your PowerPoint notes, your Canvas chapter outline so you can highlight and take good notes. So I'm going to ask this question. I want you to picture this. Maybe you're very close to your teenage years. Maybe it's been some time or you have teenage children, but think back and try to remember these feelings, remember these ideas while we ask these questions. How do teenagers form their own self-identity? What are some characteristics of a typical teenage relationship? So think back to when you were first dating. So we're going to start looking at romantic relationships now. Are they like this? Are they the same type of relationship you have as an adult? What makes them different? What role do part-time jobs play in development? Are they good? Are they bad? A combination of both. So we're going to look at how that affects the adolescent as they transition into young adulthood. And what negative consequences do teenagers face when they engage in drug use? So we're going to delve into that and really look at what are some of those negative consequences. We know about drug use isn't bad, but we're going to look at very specific things that endanger that teenager. So remember that teenager mind. Remember we learned from in chapter 8 that there's a pro and con of it. Teenager mind is at the most willing to learn. You're gonna get the best learning out of it. So that's why they tell you try to pick up a skill, play a sport, play an instrument, learn a new language, because that information processing is at its peak and the myelin is at its peak. But that also means what we learn is that bad habits tend to stick as well. So if they start something, drugs or alcohol at this age, they're more likely to become addicted as an adult, because again, that brain is very at its peak to take whatever you're going to stimulate it with, be it good or bad, it's going to really stick in this age period. So we're going to look at specifically some of those consequences that happen during the teenager, knowing what we know now about the teenage brain, why that is so important that we deal with the consequences of drug use. So as we go into adolescence, the big thing that we've discovered is that this is really when girls and boys start to really begin to discover their identity and self-esteem. They're not quite a child anymore. They're not quite an adult. They're in that in between. So they're trying to discover and figure out who they are and what they want to be. So first thing we're going to look at is identity and self-esteem. So we want to ask the question, how do adolescents achieve an identity? What are the stages and results of acquiring an ethnic identity? And how does self-esteem change in adolescence? So as we go through 9, the first part of 9, we're going to ask those questions and find the answers. The search for identity. Welcome to the age of self-identification. So during adolescence, you're going to have physical change, you're going to go through puberty, and then you also have a major cognitive change. You're going to be peaking in your brain, and then you're going to have major psychological changes as well as you search for your identity and your purpose in the world. So think back to when you were a teenager and trying to figure out who are my friends, where do I fit in, what group do I want to be, who do I want to be, what do I want to be, all this uncertainty, right? And not quite knowing exactly who you are and what you want to be. So that's why they call it the age of self-identification. So let's think about from a psychological view. According to Erickson, adolescents face a crisis between identity and role confusion. So, right, they're just trying to figure out who they are. So this is that stage in Erickson. During this time, there is an increase in truancy and increase in out-of-school problem behaviors as the young adult transitions to high school. Teenagers use this time for experimentation to form their own identity, so they try out a lot of different things. Can you think of some of the things that you tried out, or now you look back and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that? But you're just trying to figure out, do I like it, do I not? They can envision themselves as, maybe not realistic expectations. As it says here, rock stars, famous writers. I'm going to play for the NBA, the NFL. They may not have realism set in their goals. They have that ability to really dream high. Um, they, they don't have experience or life, Ori may not have had adversity that would have quelched some of those dreams. So this is the time for experimentation, a lot of abstract dreams, hope, all that in this adolescence. So they're facing that identity versus role confusion. So just remember, a sense of identity equals capacity to establish intimate relationships. So if you know who you are, then you're able to share that with somebody else. You can actually have an intimate relationship. And a confused sense of identity, or you don't have, a strong sense of identity, you're going to remain isolated and respond to others stereotypically. Because if you don't know who you are, how can you form intimate relationships, meaningful relationships? You may respond, stereotypically, but they're not going to be, have a full capacity to be intimate and vulnerable. And just remember that hypothetical reasoning skills in formal operational stage begin to experiment with themselves, the different selves. So they have that hypothetical, so they can think of, oh, what ifs, all the what ifs, and then they can really dream big. That's that rock star, famous writers. So in this stage, they're really, the sky's the limit. They're going to experiment to figure out who they are and what they want to do. What they found, we're going to look at the table on the next slide, is that adolescents often progress through different stages on their path to forming their identity. So let's take a look at that progression and that path. So this table is the search for identity. So remember, with anytime I see a table, it's a great study guide. It puts everything easily to figure out and study from. So you thought that just finding your identity was simple. I'm going to go out and experiment and try some things. They've studied, there's actually a path, a progression that teenagers, adolescents do to find their identity. So let's take a look at these. So you can see, as labeled on the slide, there are 4 statuses of identity. And the main idea of this theory is that one's sense of identity is determined largely by the choices and commitments made regarding certain personal and social traits. Identity is shaped by many factors such as nationality, race, ethnic group, physical appearance, culture, talents, interests, language, and religion. All these factors may affect a person's identity, but few of them affect it significantly. So what they're saying is that, so many things can affect who you are. It could be, where the culture you were raised in. What do I look like? Am I popular? Do I have, or am I not? Or am I a little overweight, or am I too thin? Do I fit this ideal? With my religion, do I have certain, identifications with that? My talents, am I a great violin player? So, that's going to shape who I want to be. So all those things make us into kind of figuring out our identity. But what they found, that you take them individually, few of them, individually affect it all significantly. So let's take a look at them. So the first one is diffusion. And the definition of this is an individual is overwhelmed by the task of achieving an identity and does little to accomplish the task. So the example they give is that Larry hates the idea of deciding what to do with his future. So he spends the most of his free time playing video games. So do you know the people that can't handle things, that just the idea of having to figure it out is just too overwhelming? So they say, forget it. I'm just going to go mess around. I'm going to go hang out with my friends and play video games, because the idea of figuring out my future is just too much. It's just, I'm so overwhelmed. The idea of having to figure that out, that's diffusion. So that's the first status of identity. Just too overwhelmed, not going to deal with it, going to go do something else. The second status here is foreclosure. And what that is that an individual has a status determined by adults rather than by personal exploration. So the example here is that Sakura's parents have told her for as long as she can remember that she should be an attorney and join the family law firm. She plans to study pre-law in college, although she's never given the matter that much thought. So maybe you or a family member or friends, have you ever had someone go, oh, I'm just going to go in the family business, do it, and I'm going to become, I'm going to become a lawyer, become a real estate agent, whatnot, because my parents told me to do this, and I don't, I haven't really thought about it. I haven't really tried it out, but they do it. They make good money. It's in the family. I'm just going to do it. It's somebody else making the decisions, an adult making a decision predetermined for you. You never went out and self-explored and made that decision really on your own. That's foreclosure. So diffusion is, I just don't, I'm overwhelmed. I don't care. I'm going to avoid it. Go do something else. Foreclosure is basically, I'm just going to do what the adults have told me my whole life. I don't want to self-explore it myself. They say it's good. I'm going to trust it's good. Sounds good. I'm just going to do it. I haven't really given it much thought. If they say it's good, I'm going to do it. That's foreclosure. The next one is moratorium. And this is when an individual is examining different alternatives, but has yet to find one that's satisfactory. So this is the example they give here is that Brad enjoys most of his high school classes. Some days he thinks it would be fun to be a chemist. He really liked chemistry that day. Oh, but then another day he wants to be a novelist because he read this great book. And then some days he just likes to be an elementary school teacher because that sounds like an awesome job. So he thinks it's a little weird to change his mind so often, but he also enjoys thinking about different jobs. So that's that person that, likes lots of different things, maybe is, oh, I really, really want to do this, and then changes their mind all the time. That one is really, when you think about it, very, very experimental. Like when you think of the experimental, likes lots of different things, can't make up their mind on one, but is willing to explore and try all the different things. So I think of moratorium as more like that experimental identity. I'm going to keep examining until I find one that sticks because I like lots of different ones. And the last one here is achievement. The individual has explored alternatives and has deliberately chosen a specific identity. And then the example they give is that Efrat wanted to play in the WNBA throughout middle school. During the 9th and 10th grade, she thought it would be cool to be a physician. In 11th grade, she took computing courses and everything finally clicked. She found her niche. She knew that she wanted to study computer science in college. So the key here is that you can see she explored. So she didn't pick something and say she wants to be a computer scientist in middle school. No, she wanted to be in WNBA. Then she's like, oh, well, I really want to be a physician. 10th grade, maybe I had a science class I really loved. But then when she took the computer class, she's like, it clicked. Like everything fell into place. So the key is that she did the self-exploration. She tried different things, found what was best for her, and then chose it purposely. So I can think of, many of you maybe had that. I had kind of an experience like that in middle school. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, specifically a judge. And then when I went to high school, that changed. I wanted to be maybe a translator for the UN. I wanted to do languages. Then I realized, well, that's not really going to work. And then it clicked for me when I went, because I really like sciences and math, when I went to a friend's physical therapy appointment. When I was a junior in high school, I said, yep, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to help people. I want to spend time with them. So I had different ideas. I really thought, I was involved with them and I explored it, but then I found my niche and I decided. Now, when we decide that, it's for everybody, has a different timeline. And some people take forever and are still working on that. Maybe some of you are in that stage right now, but that's the idea. When you think of achievement, it's not just deciding, it's exploring all your options. So if you think of achievement, you're exploring all your options till you find the one that clicks. So just remember that unlike Piaget stages, these four do not form a sequence. So they do not have to go in order. This is not like you're going to go from one to the other and then come out an achievement. These are just statuses. They're not stages. They're statuses. So most adolescents are in a state of diffusion or foreclosure, right? Because they're finding their identity. So either it's so overwhelming they just don't want to deal with it, or they've trusted adults for the most part to decide for them, just because they haven't had the opportunity to have exploration yet, or they haven't found anything they wanted to explore. So they are avoiding crisis or have resolved it by taking others' suggestions. So that's that crisis kind of in their identity theft. So they've avoided it in diffusion, and they just had others decide it in foreclosure. So when you think of this phase, you're thinking diffusion and foreclosure. So if I asked you a question and you said, what status is most adolescents in, you would say diffusion or foreclosure. But as they move into adulthood, they move more into moratorium and achievement. Why do you think that? Well, first of all, they have to have the time to explore. You have to be given the opportunities to explore new things. And if you may not necessarily have that in high school. So they may need extra time. And as their brain matures and they have more life experiences, more exploration, they can make decisions and decide for themselves. So diffusion and foreclosure, you want to think during that this identity, versus role stage. And then as they move into adulthood is moratorium and achievement. So as these adolescents search for their identity, there definitely are specific characteristics of the ways they think during this search. So we're going to take a look at that. So when you think back and we think of, how we've progressed and we've learned in the semesters of how the brain develops, how we, become that egocentrism, and now we're going to kind of go into adolescent egocentrism, which is a teen's focus on their own feelings and experiences. So how does that teenage brain, so think back, you guys, some of you may still be technically teenagers. You have probably a lot of input on this because you're freshest in it. How did you think when you were deciding who you were going to be? How did you determine that? So first one they look at is that it's often characterized by an imaginary audience. So what does that mean? So that means that the belief that their peers are constantly watching them. So remember, adolescence is a very, sometimes what I would say paranoid. You just overthink things. When I think of adolescence egocentrism, I think of that good or bad, everybody is seeing my faults. Everybody knows when, if I have a pimple, everybody can see my pimple, that type of thing. So you're very self-absorbed, not always in a way that you think you're so great, but sometimes that you think that people can see all your faults as well. So when I think of teenagers, they're so self-absorbed, but when I compare that to my adult self, I'm like, I don't even, I can look back and think, couldn't care if you had a pimple or not, or what you wore now. I mean, we're just not as self-absorbed. So when you think of that adolescent's egocentrism, it's just that the focus of their own feelings and experience is the center. Good or bad, they think that people are always paying attention. That's that kind of self-center. So for one of those ways they do that is often characterized by an imaginary audience. So they feel that the peers are always watching them. So a good example is that pimple, right? So if I have a pimple, every single person at school is going to know I have a pimple. They're all watching me. They're all talking about me. So it's like, okay, we can look back now and say, okay, not everybody, maybe a couple of people will see it or whatnot, but, you are not the center of the, of the world there, but you feel like that. So you feel like any fault, and you're really hard on yourself because you feel like your peers are always kind of looking at you and judging you. So it's that, imaginary audience that you haven't confirmed, but you feel like all of them are going to be judged for your faults. Another example would be if you got a stain on your shirt at lunch, and then you would just think everybody can see my stain, everybody's obsessed with it, talking about it. So it's just, you can blow things really out of proportion. So if you ever been around some teenagers like that and you're like, oh my gosh, it's not a big deal, and they're like, it's not a big deal, are you kidding me? This is where that comes from. It's that imaginary audience, and that's the adolescent egocentrism. That's the way their brain thinks right now. And as they go through this transition into adulthood, that's how they process, that's the lens they're looking at to form their identity. So you can understand why teenage years are so hard if this is how their brain is working. And I definitely remember doing this. I'm sure some of you do as well. So hindsight now as an adult, I can, discover that that way of thinking is not realistic. And, I can be a little, the world does not, care what I wear, but as a teenager, that is not the case. So we need to respect that and understand where they're coming from. So the second way that they are thinking is called the personal fable. So what that means is that the belief that their own experiences and feelings are unique and no one has ever felt like this before. So you see this right, when teenagers may say, you don't understand what I'm going through. You don't know how it feels. Have you heard that a lot? I know I said it as a teenager and felt it as a teenager, but they just can't believe that anybody, what there is, that no one else has felt like this. I'm the only one that's gone through this. They just can't understand that shared experience. Even when you try to relate to them, or maybe your experience as a parent, they just don't want it. They've closed down because they don't believe that. What that can lead to is we see that isolation, right? So we get so think of the impact of social media and bullying. And when you feel like you're unique and no one's experienced that, and you're so down on yourself, you can see why people could get isolated and hurt themselves, or even, commit suicide and stuff. So think of that teenage brain, and that contributes a lot to it, that personal fable. So if they feel like they're alone and no one has their own, experiences, and no one's felt like them before, that could lead to, kind of going down that rabbit hole of depression and ill feelings for each other. But, that's just some of that. As you find your identity, you realize that people do have shared experiences, and you start to form a friendship. So that's the process. As you start to come out of that personal fable belief from adolescence to young adulthood, you realize that. And as you do that, you start to find your identity, because you realize people do have shared experiences. Oh, they do that. I could do something like that. So you start to see what could happen, and you start to see, yeah, I can kind of identify with that other person. And then the third one here is illusion of invulnerability. So that's the belief that misfortune only happens to others. So that's one of the reasons why that a lot of teenagers don't believe they're going to get pregnant, like the first time they have sex, or if they don't use a condom, because they believe, no, that happens to other people. They can't, real life doesn't seem real to them. Movies, all that fantasy, yeah, that's other people's lives, not mine. So that's why they happens another reason why a lot of, they try a lot of things as well. If I take that drug, I won't get addicted because that doesn't happen. It only happens to others. I won't overdose, if I do these things. So part of that, and we've talked about that limbic system, not as overdeveloped, and the frontal cortex, that reasoning is not fully developed yet. So part of that is that, contributes to that as well. That because, I'm kind of indestructible. I'm healthy, my friends are healthy, so of course, there's other people, they don't see that. So they can make poor decisions from that. So just kind of to sum all this up, some teens do some crazy things to try to find their identity. And I'm sure we've all maybe have done it, seen it, or thought about it. So some examples are that they sign up for every sport and see what they like. They'll get no sleep. They'll have a different boyfriend or girlfriend every week. They'll dye their hair many colors. They'll buy or ask for expensive clothes without even thinking of the consequences. They'll try out for lead plays and roles. Maybe they never acted. They'll do a ton of embarrassing ways, embarrassing things that they may not have done, just to try out and see what sticks. So there are 7 main ways teens seek their identity. So by status. So they do things that belong to a certain group. So they're going to first they're going to seek out a group that they can try to belong to. Family relations. They're going to take on specific family identity in order to stand out. So you may have seen this in your family. I'm the academic one. No, and I'm the athlete. I'm the comedian. I'm the musician. So something very general they're going to try to seek out so they can have some kind of identity, some role in the family. They may seek out alcohol, drugs, and sex. So in order to feel more grown up, be rebellious, disrespecting authority. Um, they want to show, they want to prove to others that they're smart or brave or can try things. So all those are the ways that they can seek their identity. They want to be impressive. They want to show their peers that they can, that they can do things like, yeah, I'm super strong. I can, push that over. So they want to be there, impress their friends so that they have that, identity of being liked. And sometimes when they can't impress their friends, they'll give in to peer pressure. This is a time where you might see a lot of idolization, that idolize musicians, star athletes. They want to be like them, even when they maybe aren't the best role models. They're cliquish. So I'm sure all of us have, who've been in high school have been around cliques. And I know I went to BHS. The cliques were, we had cowboys, jocks, and we had kind of the, the ones that the academics, and then you had the people that were into art and play. I mean, it just was really, definitely cliquish. So those start to form. They're separating themselves from those that dress or talk or act in a manner that they don't approve. So if oh, I don't, you don't wear what I think you should wear, I'm going to form this other clique, or be mean to each other. We've seen that in adolescence. That Mean Girls is a perfect example of that. So I know I saw it in high school. You may even see it with kids that were friends in middle school and adult and childhood, and then they come to high school and they form these cliques, and then all of a sudden they won't even be friends with a lifelong friend. They'll talk down to them because of peer pressure. So I'm sure all of this, if we think back to our teenagers, all sounds familiar. Those are the ways that they seek their identity: status, family relations, try to do grown-up behaviors, rebellion, affirmation from others, idols, looking up to idols, being cliquish. So all those ways, those all make sense. And then they do it with that teenage brain of, using the imaginary audience. Again, get a stain on my shirt. I think everybody's looking at me. The imaginary audience. The personal fable is that everything, nobody has I have a unique experience. Nobody has ever felt what I have. A lot of the examples, again, of the first love. I broke up, it's my first breakup. You have no idea what it feels like to love somebody. You have no idea what a breakup is. Despair of a broken relationship. And then these are true feelings that they, feel. So it has true consequences. And then that illusion of invulnerability. Teens think they can have sex without getting pregnant or getting STDs. They can drive while drinking without getting into an accident. So when we think about the formation of our identity, we're thinking about all these ways. Think about that culture of the teenage environment and how they seek out their identity. And unlike preschoolers, adolescents know that others have their own perspective, but are simply more interested in their own. So preschoolers don't realize others have their own perspective, so they just think the world revolves around them because they don't know. But now high schoolers, they know other people have their own perspective. They just don't care. The world is kind of back around to me, me, me. But it's an adolescent egocentrism because they're choosing it because they realize other people have feelings. But right now, I just got to deal with me. So remember that is the difference between the different stages of egocentrism. They have knowledge, but they choose to think about themselves only. So as adolescents form their identities, egocentric thinking begins to vanish. They start to care more about other people. So you can see from that teenage into that early adult, they can start to empathize a little bit more. They're not so self-absorbed, good or bad. So how do they get there? Who helps these teens form their identities? Right? You have mentors, you have your parents, your peers, who are helping helping you find your identity. Think about the person in your life that really helped you or guided you, good or bad, into, forming an identity at one point in your life. So let's take a look. So first one is parents, of course, right? So who you live with or who the teenagers live with. So they're going to be a strong influence. Parents, especially when they are open to discussion and allow their children to explore different options, are more likely to find their identity. Parents are encouraged to discuss and recognize that teens' autonomy. So they're trying to teach them to be self-sufficient. It's a hard age where I'm still a kid, but I'm almost an adult, so I need responsibility. So it's the parent's job to teach them to be self-sufficient and be responsible, but with the safety net, so that when they do make a mistake, they learn from it in a safe environment. They need to encourage that to help the teen reach the achievement status of identity. They'll never reach full identity if they aren't autonomous. They have to be able to make some of their own decisions to just decide who they are. Else it's just the parent telling them who they're going to be. Another thing is peers, right? So your peers, again, second problem, peers are one of your greatest influences during this time. They are the culture of high school. Is definitely a rough one. It can be at times, and so your peers can make or break it. But the ones that are especially close, trustworthy friends, ones you can confide and be vulnerable, they can help you form that identity. Peers and the broader social context, which means the setting in which people live or something happens, are more influential with development of identity. So you just gotta remember, those peers have probably one of the strongest influences on a adolescent's identity, because they're the one that in this time is who they're going to look and see their approval from. And if you have trustworthy friends that will support you in your finding who you really want to be, you're more likely to be open to that. If you have closed off or judgmental or you're less likely. And the broader social context is that we always go back to this, the environment. If you have poverty, limitation of poverty, if you're looking for food and shelter, you're not going to be thinking about your identity, because you're going to be thinking about surviving. And if you can't eat or have shelter, it doesn't matter who you are, because you will not be alive. So it's that Maslow higher thinking idea. So again, you might think, have ideas of kind of where you want to be, but you're just stifled in the idea that I just have to survive. And then personality, especially agreeability and openness to experience. So if you just have a very agreeable personality, you're open to try new things, you're more likely to, discover your identity. So the identity formation is about developing a strong sense of self. So knowing who you are and sticking by it. A positive self-identity is vital to shaping their perception or belonging, not just in the teen years, but in adult life. So you need to understand who you are. So this is important as we get to romantic relationships. So identifying who you are, what your values are, what's important to you, and, liking who you are and having that positive feedback and knowing what you're, faults and, accepting that is going to be you're going to be able to be in an intimate relationship with a significant other, because you know who you are. So you can imagine if you don't know who you are and you're trying to find your identity from someone else, that causes a lot of problems. Another thing I want you to take away from this is that parents who set rules with no explanation and little enforcement will stay in the foreclosure status. So remember, foreclosure is when the parents or the adult tells you exactly what your identity is going to be or what you're going to do. These teens are discouraged from experimenting personally, and parents tell them what identity to adopt. So just remember that. Parents who set rules with no explanation. So, I told you to clean, you go to your room right now, and you go, why? Because I said so. That's that type of parent. And rules with no explanation. And they'll just stay in that. They'll just look for their parents to tell them who they should be. So definitely something to remember for the test. So if you remember early when I first talked in this chapter, that there are many things that help form your identity, ethnic identity being one of them. And with 1/3 of adolescents and young adults in the U.S. Members of an ethnic minority group, that's a huge influence. And we have a great representation in this class. So as we go through this, I want you to look and see, is this a representation? Was this my path in finding identity? Again, these are generalizations done by research. Not everybody fits this mold, but this is kind of what they discovered through research, is how people discover their ethnic identity. So we typically develop an ethnic identity, we become part of the group and learn its cultures and traditions. Typically, this is in 3 phases as we achieve this ethnic identity. So as we look at this, I want you to kind of picture yourself or someone you know. Is this how you discovered it? So, or did you just always, have this strong tie to your, this is my ethnicity and I identify with it. So this is again just a general what they found from research. Initially is no examination of ethnic roots. I'm sorry. So if they just were basically not interested, maybe they weren't, they didn't care yet. They're just kind of in that, whatever type of stage. A lot of teenagers, adolescents are like that. The second step, so, a lot of teens are not interested in a lot of things. So it isn't surprising that they, maybe just like kind of blow off their grandparents or when they try to, there's cultural things to go to or learn. They're like, whatever, but teens do that with everything. We learned it earlier, just a couple of slides above, prior to this, they have that adolescent's egocentrism. So again, it's back to me, and I know you have feelings and thoughts, but mine are more important to me. So they start off as not interested. The second is like, they may begin to become curious. They may explore the personal impact of one's cultural heritage. So notice that personal impact. So we're still in that teenager that's still about kind of me. How is this going to affect me? So they're like, that looks kind of interesting. I want to learn a little bit more about my culture. Well, I want to know how that impacts me. So maybe they'll look up some of their history. They'll learn a tradition. Maybe, their grandparents make a special meal. So maybe they'll learn, I'm going to learn that because, I really like that. And I want to, it's all about kind of still about them, but they become curious. They may want to learn a tradition, because now it fits into their life. It affects them personally. And then they found, and then lastly, they achieved that distinct ethnic self-concept. So they identify fully as that ethnicity. So they can identify with their parents' ancestry and who, where, and how they lived. And they can put it all together now. So maybe now they're starting to have a little empathy for maybe the struggles of their grandparents or their parents or the history of their culture or why it's so important. And they've not only put a personal impact, but they can put a cultural impact and see that importance. So you can kind of see how that teenage mind, even though they may have lived this their whole life, they may at first been like, whatever, because that's just a teenage mind at times. Not everybody. Again, when we talk about these, these are general. Some people, they go through these stages or they don't go through all of them, but this is what they kind of found in general. So can you relate to that? Does that make sense? Or is that not your journey, your story? But for the test, just know that this process that usually is, no examination, then it's usually the personal impact. And then the last is they can definitely understand and achieve that self-identify with that ethnic group and understand that the impact of the cultural as a whole, not just as them personally. So what are some of the benefits of a strong ethnic identity? What would you guys say? The first one is higher self-esteem. Anytime you can have a strong identity and you really understand your culture and where you came from and you can relate it to you, you're going to feel more positive. You're going to feel, you understand yourself better. And so because you understand yourself better, you're going to believe in yourself better. So higher self-esteem. More enjoyable interactions with family and friends. That makes sense. So if you have a strong ethnic identity, you're going to your family for sure, right? That has that same identity because you're going to have that common link and you're going to support each other in that. And then your friends, because they're going to see that you know who you are, you identify that, and you're having that positive effect. You're going to have better performance in school and then more likely to attend college. So again, it's that whole idea of you knowing who you are, you can make better choices. If you understand, an ethnic identity is just a part of you, right? It's a part that you identify with. So if you have a good, strong ethnic identity and you know who you are and you know where you came from, you're going to be more confident. You're going to be, when decisions come to be made, you're going to have a better idea of how to make the decision that's right for you because you have a strong background of who you are. So, all those things so it's all positive things. So knowing, anytime you can identify the different parts of your identity, and ethnic identity being a very important one, you're going to just be able to make better decisions and progress through into adulthood smoother. If you're confused and don't have strong strong identification, or you're angry, or, just at anything, any part of your identity, and you just don't know who you are, you're going to not, you're just going to have a harder time performing. And because if you don't know who you are, then how are you going to make, choose and decide on your life path and be happy? So they found that adolescents with a strong ethnic identity tend to have higher self-esteem, enjoy their interactions with family or friends more. They are typically happier, perform better in school, and are more likely to go to college. Teens will have higher self-esteem and enjoy interactions and be happier with strong ethnic identity and less affected by racial discrimination. So that's just what the research has said. So if you know who you are, then you'll be able to meet the challenges, the adversity better, because you will know who you are, you will know who you came from, and you will have that support of your family and your friends and your culture to help when you do if you are come upon racial discrimination, you will have the tools already in place on how to deal with that, because you have learned about your culture and you'll have the support of the culture and your family behind you. So that's one of the reasons why they say it's so important to be able to have that ethnic identity established. So we've talked about the teenage mind, and a huge thing is how our peers, we were talking about finding an identity. So a lot of that is how our peers, how our peers see us. And are we able to stand strong in who we believe we are, or have a good sense of self-esteem, or do we falter? Teenage years are really hard. It's really hard to develop that at times because of, especially now, the culture of social media. It's very much easier to say mean things when you're not saying them face to face, and how much that affects our self-esteem. So let's take a look at the development of self-esteem, and then we'll understand a little bit more of those outside influences on it. So self-esteem usually stabilizes in early adolescence. It sometimes tends to drop as children adjust to new schools and new social circles. So some of the things I just talked about. Definitely any change self-esteem, because you may say, I've been going to this school forever. I've got my, I know my people. I feel very confident. They know me. Then I change school and I got to start it all over again. I start to doubt myself. They don't know who I am. Oh, so-and-so said that. Do they not like me? All the stuff we talked about, right? That being in that adolescent egocentric, and then losing your stable environment where you knew the outcomes of actions and you knew the people. So with self-esteem declining gradually during the early elementary school years as children compare themselves to others. So they start, you start to build your self-esteem when you're little, and then when you kind of hit middle school, my daughter's in 5th grade, they're already feeling that when we talked about girls having a lot of relationship aggression. So they're already starting to use some of that comparison to gain control and popularity. So you see that it's instigated in the way they talk, their relationships. And so just by comparing yourself to others, where you may not be as tall, or you feel like you're not as skinny, or you're not as gifted, sports wise, or as muscle, start to compare yourself. And because you're not what these people say are ideal, you might have some decrease in self-esteem. I'm sure we've all experienced that. As adults, we can deal with it a little bit better because we know life goes, we've had life experiences and we know we continue on. But during this age, they don't have that. And so it can be very hard to, sometimes power through. By the beginning of adolescence, though, they say self-esteem stabilizes. But so once they start to find their groove, maybe in high school, they've got their friends, they've got their cliques, whatever, they start to get kind of stabilizes, unless we talked about moving or some kind of change happens. What they've also found is that when you're in adolescence, and you may have seen this as well, you have self-esteem in different areas. So maybe you're a really, really good athlete, but you're very, shy around people. So when you're playing your sport, I have the best self-esteem. I'm confident in myself. I know myself. But, maybe in my social components, I'm very shy and introverted. So you see this a lot. And you may even know people now like this. So when you want to think of as you start to develop the self-esteem, it's definitely differentiated. So you could have different levels of self-esteem for academics, social interactions, and physical changes. You are starting to realize you're not just one person, right? You have different facets of your personality, different strengths. So at times I'm really confident and have high self-esteem. If I'm doing something, I feel very confident I can do well. And then maybe when I'm put in situations where I feel like I can't do well, or I don't feel as confident, then I may have lower self-esteem. So during this time, social component becomes even more complex and differentiated. So depending on who you are with, what group, what you're doing can affect your self-esteem. It's not just straightforward. Just remember, youth are able to evaluate themselves in more domains as they develop their evaluations in each domain are increasingly independent. So what does that mean is that a 9-year-old may have self-esteem in academics, social, and like a physical domain like their looks, but a 15-year-old may have high self-esteem in the academic domain, moderate self-esteem in the social, and low in the physical. So you can see between that 9 and 15-year-old, there's those different domains, and they're able to evaluate themselves. Where if a 9-year-old may just say, I am high in everything, I am good. And my daughter's kind of like this too. So like when you think that you're good at something, you may think you're better kind of at a lot of things. Where when we get to adolescence, we become very hard on ourselves. We compare ourselves so much that we actually have like different domain levels. So that 15-year-old isn't straight across the board, right? It's got a high self-esteem academics, moderate in social, and a low in physical. So self-esteem isn't just one. I don't have just good self-esteem. No, I may have good self-esteem in certain areas and low in others. And another example would be like, so if I want to even break down social more, I may have good social self-esteem with my parents, but I feel like I'm a loser in relationships. So you can even break down even more like the physical, and the academics, so depending on who you're around. So just remember, adolescent self-esteem is very differentiated, and depending on what you're doing and who you're with, to determine your self-esteem. Whereas like children just tend to see themselves as one way. Either I have high or I have low or I have medium. They don't differentiate between the different domains as much. So let's take a look at what are some of the influences on adolescent self-esteem. What contributes to an adolescent self-esteem? So think back to your teenage years. What made you feel confident and have good self-esteem, and what didn't? Who did that? Who were you around? Did you feel really confident and have good self-esteem, and who didn't? Kind of picture that in your mind as we go through this, and let's see if it kind of fits in there. So self-confidence, you can have higher in areas of interest and ones in which they do well, which that makes sense, right? If I'm really interested in, like for me, say I played basketball and I was really good at it and I was really interested, yeah, I'm gonna be really confident. I'm gonna be really confident. That's gonna contribute positively to my self-esteem. Self-esteem is greater when adolescents are skilled in areas they value. And self-worth is also affected by how others view them. So if I do really well and someone says, hey, you did a really good job, so I'm going to feel more confident if people keep telling me how good I am at something, right? So that's going to build my self-worth and my self-esteem. And then we look at parents. Can also have an effect on our self-esteem, right? They're the ones that are guiding us through this time. So if parents are warm and affectionate, those are the parents that we think back to our parenting style and think about that style. Which style do you think goes with this? They're best for fostering high self-esteem. Why do you think that? Because they're open for them to find their identity, right? They set rules with explanation. They reason that authoritative, not authoritative, but authoritative parent. Um, and so they're giving those opportunity to discover themselves, and they're teaching them, rules with explanations, and they're giving them self-worth. They're teaching them that is important. So parents that are warm and affectionate, they foster high self-esteem, moderate level of discipline, and openness for discussing rules. So they have a lot of reason. They do have discipline, but they're definitely open to why are we doing this, so that they helps them to explore and find their self-worth. Parents who fail to set rules are telling children they don't care. They don't value them enough to care to set rules and enforce. So that's why they're saying when you have that permissive parenting style, we learned in the last chapter that, those parents that want to just be the cool mom or the cool dad and do whatever their child, but you're actually, doing a disservice to your child because they don't know how to act in the world yet. They need those boundaries to feel safe and to make good decisions, to find out who they are. So when they don't have that, they tend to have low self-esteem because they do not have anybody like looking out for them and guiding them. And then they feel like that's how they, okay, if they're not guiding me and caring enough to like making sure nothing happens to me, then they must not love me enough. So then that will set off the trend of low self-esteem. Another thing, inflated praise can also give a child low self-esteem. So that's when someone tells you that you're good at something when you really know that maybe, you're not as good as you think. And then what happens is that you get a challenge. You're so afraid of failing because maybe you're not as good as they keep telling you how great you are. And then you're so afraid of failing because you might not be as great. So they shy away from challenges. They're very fearful. They're afraid they won't succeed. They're very, they just have it begins that fear of failure. So too much praise is bad. No praise is bad. So in the middle, right? In the middle is good. And remember, children's and adolescent self-worth depends on whether they are competent at something they value and are valued by the people who are important to them. So remember that. The great saying, children and adolescent self-worth depends on whether they are competent at something they value, so they're good at something that they like, and they are valued by the people who are important to them. So they're loved and liked, and there's rules and open discussions by their parents and their peers. That's how children form good self-esteem. So you need to encourage children to find talent and be genuinely interested in enhancing their self-esteem, and be honest. You can be positive without inflated praise. And a reminder, just kind of look at the heredity, how this affects, our self-esteem, the adolescent's formation influence on self-esteem. Heredity indirectly affects it. So genes make some use. Remember, we learned about this in our genes. We have the, introvert gene and the extrovert gene. So the same thing. Genes make some youth more sociable, more attractive, and more skilled athletically. We just have that in our genes, and then the environment takes it to the next level, right? We culture that. As a result, some youth have a greater self-worth because they are just so confident in the domains that they have. They just naturally are successful. If you're good at everything, you're pretty, you're really social, things come natural to you, people are probably going to reward you for that. So all that together makes you have a natural good self-esteem. So genes can foster greater self-worth. So they can kind of indirectly, you kind of have them there, but the environment and how, they're utilized will definitely affect the full-on fostering of self-esteem. But we've all seen those people just naturally gifted, naturally pretty, and but because of that, the environment responds and gives them praise that reinforces that good self-esteem. The myth of storm and stress. So we've all been in our adolescence, and we call it adolescence angst, and they're so rebellious and they're so stressed. Is that true? Are all adolescents like that, or is that a myth? So we're going to take a look at that. I want you to think of that teenage years. Think of people who are like that. That's kind of extreme, and think of yourself and your friends during your teenage years. What do you picture? What was that for you? Did you have a time of really have a hard time of stress and rebellion? Maybe you did, but most teens don't. That they found through research. Most teens have a positive relationship with their parents. So a lot of times that they think that teens are all rebellious against their parents. That's a myth. The research has shown is that most teens have a positive relationship. Doesn't mean that all, and maybe yours, it depends always, like the situations are individual, but as a whole, statistically, most teens have a positive relationship with their parent. Teens growing independence does change the parent-child relationship, of course. As the teen gets more autonomy, they spend less time together, they show less affection. Maybe your child's like, don't drop me off in front of the school, don't give me a hug in front of my friends. They just want to be more autonomous. They're transitioning to that adult. Parents tend to mildly argue with teens over clothing, personal freedoms, hairstyles, etc. Right? So as they're experimenting and finding out who they are, you were their child. The parent was able to control a lot of aspects of your life, and giving that up is hard. And also they want to keep you safe, and they know sometimes the long-term outcomes of some of your choices, but it's all that. And, teenagers and parents may have a very different idea of what they think is fashionable and hairstyle. So that conflict can cause a little bit of rebellious, but still have a positive relationship with their parents for the most part. What they found is that 25% experience more serious conflicts. So 75% tend to have mostly positive, and then there's 25% that may have a more serious conflict. So the myth of storm and stress is truly a myth. So remember that. It's a myth for the test. The rebellion in teen is vastly overstated. Not all adolescents experience the storm and stress. It is more likely during this time period than any other age, but, not all adolescents experience. The storm and stress behavior is lower in traditional cultures than in Western. So, we definitely have it more in Western, maybe because we have more freedom, more openness. So if we look at and examine some of the cultures that we thought of, like a traditional Chinese culture where you may be reserved and you're not, traditions may make a huge thing. You might be more likely to follow your family's footsteps. Whereas in the Western culture that we just may be more open to new ideas, and, how teenagers might have more autonomy. So definitely find that. But depending on individualism in the different cities and the progression of those cities, you may find that is changing. And parents and child relationship changes during this period. It becomes more equal from that standpoint, right? So it's that shift of power, that shift of control. The teenager's trying to get more autonomy, where the parent is trying to still have a little control, a little direction before they reach full adulthood. So we've talked about how children kind of form relationships, form attachments. First it's your parents, then your siblings, then your friends and your peers. So now as you hit the teenage adolescence, you're going to start forming those romantic relationships. So can you remember your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend? What did you feel? Is it the same as you feel now? What are some of those emotions? And as we talked about earlier, that sense of identity and self-esteem play a huge factor in being able to have good romantic relationships. So, and then we're going to look at sexuality. So let's look at some of these learning objectives. So why do teenagers date? Why are some adolescents sexually active, and why do so few use contraceptives? That's kind of scary. What determines an adolescent's sexual orientation? And what circumstances make dating violence especially likely? So definitely some heavy topics here, but let's take a look at this. So let's take a look at romantic relationships. So can you picture your first romantic relationship? Did you date when you were a teenager? Where did it start? So most romantic relationships build on friendships, right? You're friends with the person or you're friends of friends. So, and what is the first relationships, that we have outside our family are friendships. So romantic relationships a lot of times are going to mirror those friendship relationships we started out, in our childhood. So how we communicated in those friendship relationships may carry over into those romantic communications. And that's why it's important to understand how women communicate and how boys communicate and how that can cause problems in relationships. So first thing, romantic relationships build on friendships. They're usually between people similar in popularity and physical attractiveness. So I'm sure that people, as teenagers have, they just kind of gravitate towards their own. As we learned back in when we talked about, boys and girls, they kind of gravitate towards their own. Trust and compassion become more important in relationships as teenagers develop. So as they develop those skills, those cognitive skills, relationships become more compassionate. Adolescents in a relationship tend to be more self-confident because they always have someone, right, that has their back, that chose them to be in a relationship. Healthy adolescent relationships associated with satisfying adult relationships. So if you have a good, healthy adolescent, you're more likely to have a healthy adult relationship. And there are more emotional conflicts in teen relationships. So let's take a look at some of these. So for older adolescents, intimacy, trust, and support becomes important features of romantic relationship, right? So you have to be able to trust and support each other. That's one of the true signs of a healthy romantic relationship. But adolescents involved in high quality romantic relationships are more self-confident and have higher self-esteem, yet there is a greater report of emotional turmoil and conflict. So why do you think that? Oh, it's so hard, right? When you in a relationship and you're more self-confident, the person's chosen you, but yet when we think back to that teenage mind, so it's kind of around you, you're always doubting yourself, you're always thinking people are judging you, you're always that emotional. Are they going to stay with me? Are they going to break up with me? Are they liking somebody else? Or it's always that change, because again, they're finding their identity, you're finding your identity, you're trying to figure out who you are, and you may not want to be in a romantic relationship anymore. So that has a lot of emotional turmoil and conflict. Can you relate to that from your teenage years? Even now, we can kind of relate to that, but definitely in our teenage years when you don't have that background, especially your first romantic relationships. So statistically, 2/3 of U.S. adolescents by high school have had a romantic relationship, with most involved in a romance lasting a year. So that's kind of crazy. So 66% of adolescents, and sometime by high school, have had some kind of relationship and lasting longer than a year. So that's pretty deep for an adolescence. 15, 14, 16, 17. That's a lot of, no wonder they're having so much emotional turmoil and conflict. That's a lot of pressure to, now they're having to care for somebody else's feelings and thoughts and, break free from that adolescent egocentrism. And sometimes that can cause a lot of, turmoil. Usually friendships serve as a prototype for romantic relationships. They start out as friends, the younger you are, and then it moves into an outlet for sexual exploration. So that's kind of the progression of adolescents' relationships, because they start, friends, and then they find themselves attracted to each other, and then they explore sexually. Early dating with many partners is associated with problems in adolescence. So that includes drug use and lower grades, and with less satisfying relationships in adulthood. So they're saying that if you have a hard time staying with one person, and you have a lot of partners, that you're just more likely to have greater drug use, lower grades, and your relationships into adulthood tend to be less satisfying. So what do you think? And part of that is think about teenage mind and what you're developing. So if those habits start to form early like that, and you're developing your identity and self-esteem, and this is where habits start to set, because your brain is at the peak of setting in all this information. So if you start to do that in those years, and you've only had rejection and a lot of changeover and doubts in your self-esteem and no stability, then you may look for other sources to get that stability or to make you feel better. Drug use. You may be more pressured by your peers not to go to school, or you may feel like school's not worth it. You may be depressed, have low grades, and then again, if those are what you learn and what your brain sets in at this time, is just more likely to become a habit, then that's going to be how you learn how to have relationships. This is where you learn how to have healthy adult relationships. So if that's what you've learned, is that there's no consistency, a lot of breakups, no stability, then we don't know why, but then you're more likely to keep that pattern as an adult. So with romantic relationships comes sexual behavior. So what they found statistically is that 2/3 of U.S. teens will have had intercourse by the end of high school. They found that parental permissiveness, so remember that permissive parent that has a lot of no rules but a lot of freedom, peer approval, having peers who are also having sex, and alcohol use are contributing factors. So all that leads to opportunity and trying to fit in with your peers. And so if your peers aren't having sex, it's easier to say no because, oh, great, they're not having sex. And anytime you bring alcohol in, it lowers your inhibition. So you're more likely to make poor decisions that you wouldn't have made sober. Boys tend to see sex as more recreational, and girls tend to view it as an expression of love and romance. Why do you think that? So just learning even from childhood, right? Boys have always been more physical. They have always been able to take the feelings part out of it. They can separate that and get over things quicker, even when they were young boys. So that just carries over into sexual relationships. So whereas you have a boy and a girl, and you might have seen this before, I know I have, where the boy is like, yeah, whatever, I kind of slept with her, but I don't love her. Where the girl is like, maybe they had sex for the first time, and now they're like, I'm madly in love. I love him so much. I'm so devoted. So like, there are definitely perceptions like where he just enjoyed himself, and she equated that because I had sex. Now that means I love him. So we definitely see that more often in girls than boys. I'm not saying that can be switched, but definitely we've learned through the lifespan how we form relationships, and so those trends kind of carry over. But now they actually have some really psychological effects. So if the girl is feeling that and they're not reciprocating on the same feelings, definitely feelings are going to get hurt. Self-esteem is going to be affected. So definitely something to think about when we're looking at this sexual behavior and the teenage cognitive mind. So just remember, there is no single factor that predicts adolescent sexual behavior. Parents don't monitor their behaviors. Peers approve, physically mature. If you're with if a girl matures faster, and remember we talked a little bit about this through puberty, and looks older, she's more likely to be with an older boy. So if she's 14 and looks 18, and because that 18-year-old is 4 years more advanced, they're more likely to have had sex. She's more likely to have sex because she's with a more physically and more mature male. You have an increased chance of sex at a younger age if you're living in a harsh environment, poverty. You wait longer to have sex if you have better executive functioning, decision making. So if you have better opportunity, again, it's the same idea. If you're in a secure home you don't have to worry about food and shelter, and you've been given examples and you've been taught that you have more opportunity. Don't have sex because you want to go to college. You have goals. You have you have things that you want to obtain, and that could get in your way. So if you're like maybe living in poverty, maybe it's a cycle of poverty. Maybe your mom was a teenage mom. They don't have enough money. So you date early. You don't have the support. You aren't taught because they don't know better. Maybe your mom doesn't know better. Maybe your dad doesn't know better. So it's just the cycle of that. So again, with when you know better, you teach better, right? So if they can get out of that cycle, then they're less likely to have sex earlier. And then just remember, girls through development have formed more intimate relationship with peers and friends where guys have not. That's just what we learned, right? Girls are relationship, boys are physical. So the natural progression for girls is to view sex as intimate because they're equating physical with emotion, where guys are just equating physical with physical. So that's definitely something you might want to think about for the test. How do guys and girls view sex differently? And do you agree with this? Or what are your thoughts? So think about that. So let's look at some more statistics here. Approximately 1 in 6 American teen girls that has intercourse becomes pregnant. So that's a huge statistic, a huge problem. 1 in 6 of us. So we have 42 to 44 people in both of the sections here. And if they were all female, that's 7 of you would be, if you were all in a teenage high school, 7 of you would be pregnant in this class. That's the statistics of it. It's crazy. That's a huge amount of American teen girls that are getting pregnant. Approximately 10% of sexually active teens do not use contraception. And many use ineffective methods of contraception. So they either don't use it or they use ineffective methods of contraception. So why do you think that? Especially now, all the sex ed, I know I went through sex ed and that's 25, 30 years ago because I was in 8th grade. And I know it's much more advanced now. You can think about when you had your sex ed class, what happened? Why wasn't that taken to heart? Why do teenagers not use, 10%, why don't they use contraception? So think back to what we've learned about the teenage brain, the adolescent brain. All these things that we may have thought about and you're just like, whatever. Now understanding the physiological reasoning behind, you can understand, well, yeah, okay, so physiologically there's some reasons why adolescents, teenagers make the decisions they make because their brain is not fully developed. They are not making decisions in an adult brain. They may look like an adult, you think they're getting there, but their brain is not capable, has not developed enough to make that. Again, that limbic system is that risk-taking system is way more developed than the frontal cortex. And that frontal cortex, which gives us our reasoning and decision-making, is not fully developed into our early 20s, mid-20s, so about 22. So that plays a huge difference. And I think that understanding that is going to be able to help guide teenagers better to make better decisions because you're understanding why they want to do it. You can kind of address those issues. So feelings of invulnerability, we talked about in here, like they can't happen to me. That happens to other people. That very egocentric, adolescent egocentric idea, right? Not having access to contraception. So maybe they don't know where to get it, how to have it. They're in the moment. They just want to feel that pleasure because that limbic system, and they didn't think ahead of time, and they just don't have access to it. And then romanticizing the idea of having a baby contributes to teens' low use of contraceptives. So there's still that idea that if I have a baby with him, he'll love me forever. We'll be a family. That's what real love is. So not having that, again, that realistic idea of what that really entails. Sexually transmitted diseases are a cause for concern when it comes to teen and sexual activity. So one of the big things is the HPV, which many of you maybe have been vaccinated. That's fairly new, but I know it's been probably within the last 10 years, and that's because HPV, even with oral sex, they can pass to people getting throat cancer. That's what Michael Douglas, the actor, had. He got that from HPV. So it's definitely sexually transmitted diseases can affect fertility and having babies later. STDs like chlamydia, syphilis, and herpes have serious complications if left untreated. You become infertile or have difficulties where you thought in your teens didn't matter, but then you're 30 and you want to have a baby and you can't, and you're wondering why. 500,000 babies with teenage moms. And just statistically, they have found that African American and Hispanic are more likely. And part of it could just be, more social and economic. Do they have the environment that allows them to have the resources? And have they been given the opportunity to learn and have access to safe contraception? Many teens are ignorant on basis of facts of conception. They don't know how to use contraceptives, or they're just embarrassed. So even with all of this, like, sex ed classes, and maybe people, some teens are just, they think they know about conception. They hear myths, or you can't get pregnant on the first time, or if they're at a certain point in the girl's period cycle, they just do not really understand the way babies are made. And we know because we learned that in our prenatal development. So we can see when that egg is released and that sperm is released. So maybe, so one of the questions we ask is, how do we do effective sex education classes to teenagers that really address that teenage mind and address the areas where maybe we're not giving enough attention to the groups, the socioeconomic groups, or the ethnicity groups that are more likely to need this resources and education. So, and then making it not to be so embarrassed, right? So that they can feel confident or have resources where they can go and ask. And, there's always the talk of, abstinence, so of not having sex. So there's all that around there. So there's all different, no matter what side you're on about teenage sex, having sex or not having sex, definitely needs to be discussion about it either way, so that teenagers can feel open to discuss these things and make informed decisions, so that we help deal with their teenage brain, because right now their informed decision part of the brain is not fully developed. So whatever your opinion is on teenage sex, they definitely need to have a good decision model, so that they can understand the reasoning and why they choose it, and have a good foundation of make good decisions. So we talked a little bit in the last slide about this, but how can teenage sexual behavior and pregnancy be reduced? What are some of your ideas? So one was, I was kind of talking about in the last slide, comprehensive sex education programs that incorporate biology and emphasize responsibility. Talk to them, let them understand, like, we learned in this class, when you understand how and why and what can happen, you're more likely to make a better informed decision. They say using role play to get teens to feel comfortable saying no. So sometimes when girls, or maybe even some boys, that feel like they're being pressured and maybe they just go along with it, role play, give them scenarios where they practice that. So if they're ever in that real scenario, they can have that freedom to say no. And research has just shown that there's little evidence that abstinence-only programs or just offering contraceptions work. So you can't just give people condoms, and you can't just tell them to don't have sex. You need to talk to them and explain why, the biology. They found like comprehensive. So when teenagers understand the reasoning behind it, they're more likely to make better decisions. So from your book, they found that research that African American and Hispanic Americans are more likely to become pregnant. And again, what I talked a little bit in the slide before is the reasons why they found is that contraception is not used, including, just ignorance that of how, contraceptives used. The illusion of vulnerability, just like all teenagers, right? That it's not going to happen to me. Lack of motivation and lack of access. So maybe they're just stuck in a cycle of of having teen pregnancy, being from a mother of teen pregnancy, or they just don't have access. So to break that cycle is to, again, have a good comprehensive sex education program, but also to deal with the problems of socioeconomic, or to really find out why. Educate on the reasoning behind the why they are having sex, and trying to understand what the outcomes, really explaining the outcomes and long-term outcomes and what they can do. Maybe they didn't even know what they could do to prevent. So just finding statistically where populations, areas are more likely to have this, and then addressing their specific problems head on is going to have a greater impact. So you want to make sure you teach the biological aspects of sex, emphasizing responsible sexual behavior and discussion of peer pressure and how to respond, how to say no. So talking about it and giving them, skills on if they want to say no and be asked and how to do that. And then, really letting them make an informed decision. And youth who are involved in these programs are less likely to have sex, and when they do, are more likely to use contraceptives. So now we're going to move on to sexual orientation. So that's, again, another identity that is explored during the adolescence. Approximately 15% of teens question their sexual and emotional attraction at some period. Approximately 5% end up identifying as gay or lesbian. For males, identifying as gay usually emerges after feeling different during childhood. What they found research-wise is that females often don't identify as lesbians until later adolescence or even later in life. And again, this is all just research in generality. Again, individuals are different. Gay and lesbian youth often have mental health problems and engage in substance use. And why do you think that? Because, right, gay and lesbian youth face challenges such as disrupted family and peer relationships, verbal or physical assault, and mental health problems that set them at risk for substance abuse. And again, social media can be great, but social media can be very hurtful and cause a lot of harm when it's used for hate. Again, what you want to know is modern accounts suggest that attraction to same-sex individuals come about differently in males and females, so that's what research has shown, that they don't necessarily take the same path. And for females, the path to same-sex attraction is less predictable. What they found in research as well, that males, genes and hormones may lead to some boys to feel different and an interest in atypical gender activities and then to an attraction to men. And then research has also shown in females, they tend to grow out of a deep feeling for a particular woman and then over time extends to other females. So again, even in same-sex relationships, males and females tend to follow a different pattern. We do not have the same type, we do not form the same type of relationships. And again, females tend to have, just deep feelings for maybe one woman, and then over time it may extend to other females. So now we're going to take a look at dating violence, and as what we've learned about how teenagers form romances, and maybe not everyone has the best, romantic relationship, you can see where the potential is for dating violence and not having full self-esteem or full identity, and then going into a relationship and it not being healthy. So it kind of can set up these scenarios of increased risk for dating violence, especially since approximately 25% of teens experience physical, emotional, or sexual violence while dating. So that's 1 in 4. That's really scary. So if you have a teenager that's really something you need to talk about, right? Because 1 in 4 teenagers that are dating are going to experience some of that. And with that, if they do experience some of this violence, it results in academic and behavioral problems, because the teenage mind, the adolescent brain, and even an adult brain, it's hard to deal with these traumas. So you're not going to want to maybe go to school, maybe act out to try to take some control back over your life. So definitely you can understand why you would have academic and behavioral problems. So what are some of the risk factors? So parent behavior, right? If you see your parents being abusive to each other, maybe they're not in the most healthy relationship, or they're too controlling, or too opposite, they're not involved, or they're too permissive. Peer behavior, if you see your friends in a bad relationship with violence, so you maybe think it's more acceptable, and maybe attitudes like your friends though. So it doesn't matter, just pushing you around is okay. Like what are the attitudes of if you have someone that's going to support you getting out of it, or do they just think it's okay? And then personality, everybody's personality. If you're an introvert and maybe you have a hard time saying no and you just go along with people, maybe you're going to be more likely to take that abuse opposed to someone who's strong-willed. So your personality might just naturally set you up. And a lot of, aggressors look for that. So they, just like bullies, look for a personality that they can, pick on. A lot of people that commit dating violence will look for that. A weak person that they know that won't say anything and then they can exert control over. So the major circumstance that places adolescent girls or young women at risk are drug and alcohol use, and adhering to more gender stereotypes. So anytime you alter your inhibitions with drug or alcohol, you're more likely to put yourself in situations that you wouldn't normally do if you were sober, and that can sometimes lead to violence, sexual violence or physical violence, because you're letting your guard down and people can take advantage of that. So several factors make teen boys likely to commit acts of violence. So one of the factors is being abused as a child or witnessing domestic violence. So it leads to the belief that violence is a normal part of a romantic relationship. So again, it's that imitation, right? Remodeling. They are depressed. So these teenage boys that tend to commit acts of violence are depressed, antisocial. They tend to use substance abuse, are aggressive, and don't do well in school. What they have found, though, is that the programs that help prevent dating violence have been effective. And one of those effective programs for reducing dating violence is Families for Safe Dates. So know this for the test. Families for Safe Dates. It's a program adopted by the CDC to use in conjunction. CDC's Dating Matters, a comprehensive dating model for approximately 8th grade students. So stardom prevention is always is always better than having to treat it. So they want to teach. I know I had my sex ed class in 8th grade. So this is that age right before they're starting to really going into high school, to teach them on how to prevent dating violence, teaching boys that even I guess aggressive girls that how to deal with their feelings, their emotions, signs of violence, how not to put themselves in positions, drugs, alcohol. So knowledge is key. Anytime you have knowledge, you can make better decisions. And also, again, so when parents are not monitoring behaviors, parents' discipline is harsh or inconsistent, teens believe peers condone dating violence, and when peers are in an abusive relationship, can all be risk factors for having a violent dating experience. All right, the world of work. So for most people, adolescent teenagers is when you start your first job. Maybe you have a part-time job after school. Maybe you get a work permit. Do they still have work permits? I know at 15 and a half, I had to get a work permit to work. So let's dive in. What does that do to the development of the adolescents? Good, bad? So let's take a look. How do adolescents select an occupation? What is the impact of part-time employment on adolescents? So let's first look at career development. So this might be a really fresh topic, right? You guys are all in college, either choosing your first career, your second career. How did you go about choosing your career? How did you decide this was what you wanted? So this is going to be great for you to picture because you're living it right now. So there's definitely different ways and different ideas behind how people select their career path. So Donald Super is one of the main theorists on career development. So you're going to want to remember that, Donald Super. And he believed that identity is a primary force in adolescents' choice of career. So what does that mean? So he had 3 phases that you go through to discover what your career choice, what you're going to identify. And what he believed is that crystallization, specification, and implementation is the process by which you will identify what career you want to have when you get older. So crystallization happens between 13 to 14 years old. Teens use their emerging identities, right? They're starting to figure out who they are to form ideas about careers. They're provisional, and adolescents experiment with hypothetical careers. They're trying to envision what each one would be like. So crystallization, I think of, is changing. I'm experimenting. Oh, like I said, I wanted to be a judge or a lawyer. Oh no, now I want to be a translator. No, I think I want to be a nurse. All those different things can change. Like crystallization, but it usually starts between 13 and 14 years old. They change, and you experiment. Hypothetical, what I want to be. And then what do you like to do, So then now we're going to go to specification, which is you're going to learn more about something specific in a line of work and begin training. So maybe an internship. So not usually about 18. So maybe an apprenticeship or an internship. So for me, I volunteered at a physical therapy facility. Maybe I would be an aide. Something to actually learn about the specific job. So like I was learning about physical therapy so that I would learn and know if I wanted to do it. I would see the day in and day out of it. I would learn some skills in it, see how that would fit into a work pattern, a daily pattern. So again, it's that specification. So now I'm actually going to go in an area that I specifically want to do and either volunteer, apprentice, do some internship, but learn a little bit of skills, understand that specific job. And then implementation. So usually in the early 20s, you're going to learn about, you're going to enter the workforce and learn your firsthand from jobs. So you're going to learn about responsibility, productivity, getting along with coworkers, and altering lifestyle to accommodate work. So basically, crystallization, you're going to have all these ideas, you're going to experiment, you're going to figure out what I like, from all my identities and all that stuff. And it usually starts about 13 or 14. By 18, you've narrowed it down. You're going to choose a specific career path. So for me, it was PT. So I was about that age, almost 18, 17. So I'm going to go do some volunteering, some internships, apprenticeship. And then maybe I have to go to school, learn the skill, and do all that. So I graduate. So after I graduate college, now I'm actually going to find a job in that specific skill. So for me, it was physical therapy. I'm going to go and enter the workforce. So I have to learn how to be responsible. I have to go to work every day. I have to take care of my patients. I have to make sure, their well-being. I have to be productive. I can't spend I have to see a certain amount of patients. I have to get them all in my day. I have to get along with my coworkers now. Like, it's not just me going to school. I have to get along with my patients. I may have to, change my lifestyle. I can't go out and hang out with my friends every night till midnight. I've got to go to bed at a decent hour because I have to work. So I'm actually implementing the logistics of going to work and learning new skills in that. So what Super believed is that interests lead to a career idea. So he gives the example of math. I'm in a treasure and club at high school. I go to college and major in business. I work at a store. I learn, that, and maybe that's internship, and then I become an accountant. So math club is the crystallization. Going to college, majoring in business, working at the store is the specification. And when I become an accountant, that's implementation. So I want you to think, when did you get your first job, and how did you make working and life, like what they say, the work-life balance? Right now, I'm sure a lot of you are having difficulty, a lot of computer time, a lot of online, and trying to work that life-work balance. And how did you implement, and what do you see changing when you implement into your career? So this is a picture of maybe apprenticeship. In the specification stage of career development, adolescents try to learn more about different careers, sometimes by serving as an apprentice. So let's critique Super's theory. So it's a nice theory and it has definitely a nice path, but what is it lacking? So Super's theory does not explain why people are attracted to certain kinds of work. So he says kind of how they do it, they like something, they apprentice, but why? Why did they even get there? So we're missing the why part of it. So personality. So the personality type theory and its work is fulfilling when the features of a job fit with a person's personality. And that's Holland. So when you think of careers, you think of Super, which is, that crystallization, specification, implementation. or Holland, which is personality type theory. So I want to ask you right now, you guys, what do you guys, you guys told me at the beginning what you wanted to, your goals were, your career goals. So I had a lot of nurses, some occupational therapists, some not in the healthcare field at all. What personality trait do you think those jobs require? So I'll just go in the healthcare because I'm healthcare. So maybe caring, have a lot of empathy, maybe science, be academically strong, science or math, be able to multitask. So do you have those attributes? So that's what he's talking about. Does your personality fit your career choice? So what he found is that most people are a blend of 6 personality types. We'll look at the next slide. And what you want to remember is that Super's identity theory helped explain how self-concept and career aspirations develop hand in hand, but not the why. And theory of match, which is John Holland, is between people and occupation. So it's the personality types theory. So John Holland is personality types theory of match between people and occupation. And Super is the identity theory that explains the how, but not the why. So here is Holland's personality types, and we can take a look at them. So again, remember, we're looking at a table, great study to study from the table. So we're going to look at it at the 6 personality types. So, and when you're looking at this, see where you fit in. Which personality type do you fit in, and does that career choice that you've made match? So first one's realistic. So individuals who enjoy physical labor and working with their hands, they like to solve concrete problems. So that's a mechanic, a truck driver, construction worker. Okay, I can see that. Investigative. Individuals are task-oriented and enjoy thinking about abstract relations. They're scientists, technical writers, right? They're going to investigate. So they're going to be able to be open-minded about all the possibilities because they're trying to solve a problem. Social. Individuals are skilled verbally and interpersonally. They enjoy solving problems using these skills. Teacher, counselor, social worker, right? That does all make sense. They using their verbal skills and their problem solving to help with personal problems. Conventional. Individuals have verbal and quantitative skills that they like to apply to structured, well-defined tasks assigned to them by others. So it's very straightforward. So they have definite skills, but they don't want to be the boss. They want to be the worker. And they want to have very well tasked. So they're your bank teller, your payroll clerk, your traffic manager. You give them an assignment, you give them a job, you tell them how to do it, and they'll do it perfectly. They're very conventional. But they're definitely not the ones that are going to seek change or be the boss or whatnot. Enterprising. Individuals who enjoy using their verbal skills in positions of power, status, and leadership. And these are your business executive, your television producer, your real estate agent. These are your bosses, right? They have think outside the box. They're going to lead you to new ideas. They're going to use those skills of their verbal skills, their persuasion, their leadership to do that. And then artistic. Individuals who enjoy expressing themselves through unstructured tasks. That's a poet, musician, actor, and that all makes sense. So just remember, most people do not match any one personality type exactly, but instead their work personality types are blended, and you might find yourself, more like one or two than the other ones. So just remember that employees tend to be productive and have stable careers when their jobs match their personality. So that makes sense. If you're actually in a job that matches your personality, you're going to be you're going to be happier, you're going to want to do your job, you're going to do it better, you're going to be more successful. Other factors that contribute to satisfaction as well is your pay. So if you're getting paid for your job well, then you're going to be happier. Workplace stress, work-family balance, etc. So if you have good environmental conditions, not a lot of stress at home, not a lot of stress at work, you're going to be more satisfied in your career. When a vocation fits a person's personality, they have a more productive and stable career. When people are well matched to a job, even when well matched, some may find work more satisfying than others, right? So even though we're personality, some people just might, just like to work more than others. So just remember this. Supers theory and Hollins give a comprehensive representation of vocational growth. Supers is the development progression by which individuals translate general interest into a specific career, whereas Hollins is what makes a good match between specific interests and specific careers. So let's move on to part-time employment. So how many of you had a part-time job in high school? Did you think it was good? Did you think it helped you, give you some life skills, or was it bad? Did it take you away from your studies or extracurricular activities? Well, we're going to take a look at what do the studies or statistics show. So about 75% of high school seniors have a part-time job. So that's 3 in 4. Part-time work can be harmful, and it can be beneficial. So some of the harmful things is that school performance may suffer if you're working more than 20 hours per week. Definitely don't have time to do your schoolwork, and for sure don't have the skills yet to balance all that. Mental health and behavioral problems. Repetitive, stressful jobs undermine self-esteem and create anxiety. So you're in a job that may be asking you to perform at a level of an adult, or more of a lot more pressure than you were anticipating for a part-time job, and you're not built yet to deal. Your brain has not been built yet to how to deal with these stressors. So that can undermine your self-esteem and then reflect in other areas of your life. Misleading affluence. So they found that most teens don't have to spend their money on necessities. Their parents would maybe use it for extra. So they learn that that money can be spent mostly on themselves. They're not learning that that first you have to pay rent, then food, then car, then all that. So they're not really learning money management because their parents are still taking care of them. So when they do go out on their own and they actually have to pay for it on their own, they have not learned that skill. They still want to just buy things for themselves. So sometimes they have what's called misleading affluence. So they're acting like they're very affluent, which they have money and can spend things, when really their parents are taking care of their basic needs. So when they have to take care of their basic needs, they don't know how to budget and take care of themselves. Statistics say that 2/3 of adolescents work retail. I personally did. And half of retail work in food and beverage industry. Do you think that working in high school is good? And what types of jobs did you guys have in high school? Did they help you with your future career? Did you learn some apprenticeship, or were they just to make extra money or to make money to help your family? So most American adolescents have at least a part-time job. It can be harmful for several reasons, which we went over. Performance at school suffers due to lack of rest or lack of time to prepare. You just don't have enough time in a day. More than 15 to 30 hours. If you're working between 15 to 30 hours, you're more likely to experience mental health and behavioral problems, develop lower self-esteem, anxiety, depression, substance abuse. Having money that is not allocated or controlled leads to a false sense of expectations of job and independence. You tend to spend on frivolous things, clothing, snack food, cosmetics, entertainment, and few teenagers set aside for the future or for the family expenses. So it's just teaching you how to be an adult. Extensive part-time work can lead to substance abuse and frequent problem behaviors such as theft and cheating in school. I honestly didn't realize that all the detrimental things that could happen with part-time employment if it's not set up correctly. But there's a lot of good things can happen as well. So let's take a look at that. So part-time employment can be good if there's boundaries set and that parents control what that teen is subjected to. So teens should avoid working long hours. They're not ready for it. They still have social skills they need to make. They still need to do academics. So 5 to 10 hours per week usually does not cause stress. So obviously you can't always be expected to do that, but if you can get into that, I don't know what job would hire you for 5 hours a week, but studies have found that if they can keep it at least under 10, that they can balance that school, work, social aspect. Jobs that value the teen's skill can enhance self-esteem. Spending money on necessities or saving can improve parent-child relationships. So maybe have them pay for their gas, pay for their car insurance, some kind of responsibility. And then that gives the child some autonomy and some, pride and self-esteem. And then it shows the parent that they can be responsible, so it improves that relationship. And then summer employment is a good alternative to part-time employment because then you're not in school at the same time. You can work more hours, make more money, so it kind of balances that better. So just remember, work allows the use of existing skills and acquires new skills. It increases self-esteem, saving money for clothes and school expenses, creates a better relationship with your parent, and summer employment is ideal that will not conflict with the demands of school. So what is the dark side of adolescence? Well, let's take a look. So we're going to explore, why do teenagers drink and use drugs? What leads some adolescents to become depressed, and how can depression be treated? And what are the causes of juvenile delinquency? So alcohol obviously is a huge part of adolescence and teenage years. Most teenagers admit to having used alcohol. What causes some teens to drink? Alcohol is an important part of their parents' social life, so they see that and they model that. Again, we start that, we learn that all through our every stage of development so far. Again, the parents that are uninvolved or set unrealistic expectations, so the one that's has too much control or not any control, tend to be the children that drink the most. If you've seen that, like parents that, let's have a party at my house, and parents are never there, or ones that I just want to rebel against what my parents' strict rules. The experience of life stresses. So if you have a lot of family problems, economic problems, any kind of life stress, you're more likely to drink. And peers who also drink. So if your friends are drinking, then you have that, you might feel peer pressured, or you might not have the strength to say no because everybody around you is drinking. Most don't do drugs, but as we established, 2/3 of high school seniors have had alcohol within the past year. Since teenage drinking has many causes, there is no single approach to eliminate the alcohol abuse. But they found that programs and therapy tailored to the cause of drinking can be an effective intervention. So the 3Ds are 3 problems of not adjusting well with adolescent development. 1 is drug use, 2 is depression, and 3 is delinquency. So programs that teach teens to cope with stress, school-based programs that are interactive, student-led, stopping before it becomes habitual, can decrease becoming alcohol dependent, depressed, or anxious as adults. And again, we're going to go back to what we learned last week. This is the time when the brain is most likely to set in a habit. Either it be a good habit, a skill, like you're going to become a great violin or a great language, but also bad habits. If you're going to be abuse alcohol, you're more likely to be addicted because that brain's going to set it in. So again, prevention, like they said, can help with those adverse effects, and catching it early before it sets into long-term addiction. So another rampant use in high schools or adolescents years is smoking cigarettes. And now we can even add vaping. So vaping has been really, really scary because all the flavors that are geared towards kids and adolescents, cotton candy, and we're seeing a lot more vaping incidents. So I want to tell you, vaping is one of the worst things you can do. It actually is no regulation, no filter on what chemicals are going into your lungs. And I have seen personally kids that have vaped and their lungs have just literally collapsed and damaged. So definitely a trend that should not be taken up by high schoolers or adolescents or any adults. And it's scary because it has been marketed to children. So cigarettes and definitely even vaping. 1/3 of teens experiment with smoking cigarettes. Supportive parents make teens less likely to smoke. Having peers who smoke is a risk factor. Anytime your peers do something, you're more likely to do it. School-based programs have been created to teach about the consequences of smoking and shows ways to resist peer pressure. So it was reported by the Surgeon General in 2000 that school-based interventions can reduce or postpone the onset of smoking by up to 49%. So, right, knowledge is power. These programs are usually age-specific classroom curricula, media literacy type, and peer education type programs. They teach refusal skills, avoidance techniques. And when you sometimes understand what smoking or vaping does to you, and you talk about the biological and the long-term outcomes, it can help adolescents, even adults, make better decisions. So I want you to think, like we think about our last discussion group, what if this was one of your questions, and how are you going to develop a teenage cessation or prevention program for adolescents and smoking or alcohol? What are some of the things you would do to ensure success? So we're going to look at depression and the adolescents. So depression is a disorder characterized by pervasive feeling of sadness, irritability, and low self-esteem. And the key word there is pervasive. So it's not feeling sad once in a while. It's not, because everybody feels sad once in a while. I mean, that's normal. That's healthy. But it's that pervasive, not being able to get out of that sadness, being sad for no reason, irritable and low self-esteem. So pervasive is the key word there. 15% of adolescents are depressed and more common in girls. So why do you think that? Depression is often triggered by a serious loss or failure. Well, that makes sense, right? Some kind of, you could have a physical trauma that sets you off, but something in your life that's traumatic can start causing that depression. Death of a family member or a terrible date. This is the teenage mind. It doesn't take a catastrophe. It just whatever is meaningful to that person. And if that was traumatic to them, and a terrible date, maybe from a boy they've liked, crushed on for a year, could throw them into a depression. Have you known about the girl that won't go out, so depressed? Those are some of the things. It's just can be very heightened at this age. Research reveals that unhappiness, anger, and irritation often dominate the lives of depressed adolescents. Well, if you're depressed, right, you're angry, you're irritated, you're unhappy. Girls more than boys because often social challenges are more for girls than boys, right? There's a lot more social pressure, and girls just tend to have those relationship aggressiveness that we learned in children development and carries on into adolescence. And believe that family members, friends, and classmates are not friendly to them and often are extremely lonely. So they again have this perception of the world against them. And so they kind of self-isolate themselves, which is a wrong perception. Just like I tell people after they've had some kind of brain injury or stroke that their body is lying to them, is not to giving them correct information on their physical positioning, balance, strength. Again, it's the same kind of idea in the brain when they're depressed. Their perception of reality is off. They're thinking their friends, their loved ones don't care about them, so they self-isolate. But that is not correct. Their brain is not giving them the correct perception of reality on that. So why do only some teens become depressed? So we learned about, right, everything can depend on a lot of different factors. We're not all the same. Temperament. So our moods, trouble with regulating emotions can lead to depression. So if you have a hard time, you get angry easily, you get sad really easily, your temperament is just unstable, then you're more likely to get depressed. A belief system that internalizes failure, so that you believe that even little things, everything you do, if you're not successful, then you have a strong punishment system for your failures. You feel like a failure equates with not maybe being a good person or not being worthy. You really internalize that. Emotionally distant or overly punitive parents, stressful family life, right? You're not learning good modeling from your parents on how to deal with stress or how to have good relationships. And then if you have an emotionally distant parent, you don't learn how to deal with emotions or actually even how to seek out friends or support when you are having difficulties with your own emotions. And research has found that African Americans and Hispanic American teens experience both poverty and depression at higher rates. So if you're more in if you're living in poverty, you have a lot more life stressors, just surviving and eating, let alone being in high school. So all that added stress can add up to more likelihood of being depressed. And then heredity, lower levels of those neurotransmitters can cause you to that oxytocin. Remember, I said that happy neurotransmitter that can make you have better moods. When back early in our lectures. So again, you can have lower levels of that, so you're just less likely to have that, that happiness happen. So just remember, negative view of self and heredity can put adolescents at risk for depression. Multiple studies exist: behavioral parent training to attempt to change the behaviors, and reduction of the stigma to seek mental health at the individual and community level can help with depression. With your temperament, you're more likely to depress if you have difficulty regulating your emotions. You're more likely to blame yourself for failure. If a date goes bad, then it is, your fault. Something is wrong with you. You take all the blame instead of like, maybe we just don't like each other, but you just start to internalize all that. So punitive shouting or physical punishment increases likelihood of depression. So treatment of depression, what they found is that antidepressant drugs only work for some adolescents, and it's not a permanent solution. Psychotherapy is better for teens because, again, it emphasizes cognitive and social skills. Remember, they're still learning cognitively and socially, and their brain is apt really right now at the best time to learn any kind of new skill. So if they're learning coping skills, another great skill. So putting that psychotherapy and learning those coping skills, maybe that they've never learned, has shown to be effective. And untreated depression in teens can lead to decreased school performance, troubled social relationships, and depression in adulthood. Drug treatment treats the so if you're going to get a drug treatment for antidepressant, it treats the neurotransmitter imbalance. No lasting effects, only works when you're taking them. So if you stop taking them, you're going to go right back to being depressed. Drug treatment has no lasting and has been linked to increased risk of suicide. So definitely something to take into consideration. It helps if a person can learn how to have rewarding social interactions and to interpret them appropriately. So not thinking that, everybody thinks that they're a failure if they have a bad date. No, we just didn't get along, just taking the reaction appropriately. Depression often precedes suicide. Approximately 10% of teens report making a suicide attempt. And again, with social media and bullying, we definitely are becoming more aware of that. Most suicides are preceded by warning signs, threats, preoccupation with death, etc. A lot of times we'll see that maybe on the social media account. Teens who exhibit symptoms should not be left alone. Therapy is essential to treating symptoms of depression and hopelessness. 1 in 10,000 teens commit suicide, and that's such a sad number. Most frequent in older adolescent boys, particularly Native American teenage boys. Suicide is the third most frequent cause of death in U.S. adolescents. Few suicides are spontaneous, most are planned. So definitely we can relate to that, especially with COVID and the increased isolation and not being with your peers and having only technical online communication. We've seen a lot of increase of suicides, maybe mental health issues, and maybe not as many people seeking help because of it. So definitely something to be aware of, and definitely something we need to be at this time have those programs being, reaching out to those high risk students. So we're going to look at delinquency. So this is a lot of times that we start to see that maybe bad behavior resort into maybe criminal activity and delinquent behavior. So there's 2 types of delinquent behavior. Adolescent limited antisocial behavior. That's relatively minor criminal acts by adolescents who aren't consistently antisocial. And then the other one is life course persistent antisocial behavior. And that is antisocial behavior that begins at an early age and persists throughout life. So those are your career criminals. 5% of youth exhibit this, and it's cause of most adolescents' criminal behavior. So it's very small proportion, but definitely significant. Adolescents are responsible for much of the crime activity in the United States. So that's a shocker. So more crime is committed by adolescents than any other age group. Adolescence has, so they usually start off shoplifting, using drugs, but may follow all the school rules. So this is an adolescent. So when you see that limited antisocial behavior, so they may do like kind of a petty crime, like a minor crime, shoplifting. They may use drugs occasionally, but they're still going to school, following all the rules. This usually vanishes in late adolescence and early adulthood. They may grow out of it, and you don't see long-term effects. But a life course or persistent, you might see this path. Maybe at 3 years old, they're hitting. And then at 12 years old, they're shoplifting, car theft at 16. So you see that progression. Maybe we've heard about like, oh, they killed animals and they're teenagers. So you've seen some of the signs. That's that antisocial life course, delinquent behavior. And it accounts for most of the criminal activity, even though it's a low amount. 5% consists of, that's 5%. Research has identified that biological, cognitive, family, and socioeconomic factors contribute to life course persistent antisocial behavior. So, we've seen many documentaries on the serial killer or the, antisocial, and they look at their family, biological. It's a debate between psychologists, right? It's definitely a thing to continue to debate, but it's, all wrapped up into one. What causes it? Are they genetically predisposed to be like this? Isn't the environment? Probably a little bit of all of it, but definitely an interesting topic to look at. So just remember, aggressive teens see the world as a hostile place and typically respond aggressively by default. So they're aggressive because they see the world as just being aggressive towards them, so they respond aggressively. So it's just a never-ending cycle. So what causes delinquent criminal behavior? So we talked a little bit about this in the earlier slide, heredity. So we all have levels of physical aggression. So some people are just have the gene for more aggression than others. And they did twin studies. Identical twins show more aggression than fraternal twins. So there definitely is a gene link. Temperament. You're more prone to aggressive activity if you're overly emotional or inattentive. You don't know what you're supposed to do, so by default you attack somebody. So maybe you don't understand the situation, you don't understand why they're mad, but just as a defensive mechanism, your default is always to attack. You're antisocial, which you're impulsive and unwilling to or unable to postpone pleasure. You steal so you can have it right now. You're inadequate. You have inadequate parenting, harsh discipline, ineffective monitoring. Parents have extreme arguments. Some of those environmental factors that come into play. Some prevention can begin in early life. A successful intervention is fast track. And what that does is it teaches academic and social skills to elementary age children, plus life and vocational ed skills to adolescents. Fast Track is a long-term prevention program that aims to prevent chronic and severe conduct in high-risk children from 1st through 10th grade. Most effective programs include education, recreation community involvement, parent-child interaction, and training and bullying prevention. So it's a whole progression. You need to be educated, you need to have the community involved, and then you definitely need to have that parent-child. And you talk about bullying and how you're going to respond to these feelings of aggression. So if you start these programs early in kindergarten, you're cut in half by 12th grade. So maybe we can take that 3-year-old that's hitting and is just an aggressive child, and maybe we can turn that around by 12th grade so they're not stealing a car. So the question is, I think your book proposes too, so when we think about adolescence and criminal behavior and that 5%. So if a 17-year-old kills somebody, should they be tried as an adult? Knowing what you know about the teenage brain, and it could go either way, right? Knowing what you know, you can see the arguments for both. They could say maybe the teenage brain isn't mature enough. Their reasoning frontal cortex hasn't kicked in and they can't make good decisions. Or you can argue the other way of being like, okay, well, they've been taught in society what's good and wrong, what's good and bad. Going to killing somebody is an extreme argument for that limbic system, and I don't think seeking pleasure in killing somebody would be a good argument for seeking as tried as an adult. So that has been a big debate, and I'm interested to see what your guys' comments on that are. But that's one of the things they look at. So adolescents and delinquency. So if teenagers commit most of the crimes, and that 5% are that life antisocial, where do they get charged? Adults or as teenagers? So something to look at. So we went through chapter 9. We learned all about the social-emotional friendships, to romantic relationships, to sexual relationships, to disease, pregnancies, delinquency, depression, sexual orientation. So a lot is happening in this teenage years. Seeking out that identity and finding that autonomy as they go into young adulthood, right? So that's what you're thinking about. And they go back to that egocentric adolescent where they know that the difference is that they know other people have feelings and that they exist, but they choose to think about themselves. So there's a lot of self-absorption with good ideas, and also that bad, really negative feelings of failure that can lead to a lot of depression and stuff. So this week we'll have our videos and our normal stuff, so make sure to look at that, and I will see you next week. Have a great week.